Ali is the global head of marketing for Distill Ventures, the world's first drinks accelerator. And Ali brings 15 years of expertise in food and beverage in a global role. And she's worked with many exciting incubator and challenger brands. So yeah, we're really looking forward to hearing from Ali, and keep the questions coming into the chat box and we'll try and get them answered. Over to you, Ali.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro, David. Much appreciated. So yeah, like I said, I'm Allie. I'm the head of global marketing for Distill Ventures. We're kind of a first of its kind accelerator dedicated to supporting founder-led drinks brands. So that's kind of our word, I guess, for challenger brands. We really work to remove roadblocks and help companies go further a lot faster. We're independently owned and operated, and we work closely with Diageo, who are our sole investor and partner. We were set up in 2013, so we've been running for about 7 years now. We've committed over £100 million to founder-led brands. 15 plus brands, I think, are in our portfolio right now. Alex and the guys from Standing being one of them. And we've had 3 exits to date. So we've exited Balthazar, which was a German vermouth based in the Black Forest. Kikori, who are a California-based rice whiskey. And our most famous, I think, to date, I mean, for sure, by a long shot, was Seedlip. So the world's first non-alcoholic spirit, solving that question of what to drink when you're not drinking. I think there's a real feeling of like collective success that comes from the work that we do. We're a small company, but we think we've had a really big impact on the drinks world so far, and no plans to slow down whatsoever. So I think that's the what. So I guess what I want to talk about today is the why. So why challenger brands? Why founder-led brands? Why do we think they're so interesting, so fascinating? And why we think that they're really changing the shape of the drinks industry. For us at DV, we're really just drawn to people, to stories, to products. I think people generally have always been interested in founder-led brands, hearing about and connecting with these like incredible stories of unexpected success and absolutely dismal failure. I think Alex, and when I'm through, he is going to share some of his astounding experiences, but I'm sure he'll agree, there's no such thing as an overnight success. The path there is impossible to get to without continued kind of trial and error. So yeah, founder-led brands are nothing new, but what I think has changed is how available they've become. So both kind of from an information and an accessibility perspective. So how has this shift kind of helped small brands who don't necessarily have a £4 million marketing budget to spend in their first year? That's kind of the big question that we're trying to answer, right? In my opinion, so a brand's path to consumers is easier than ever, thanks to these, equalizer platforms. Think about, love them or hate them. We think about Amazon. Think about Shopify. They've basically enabled brands to set up, platforms that connect directly to consumers without having to go through, distributors or retailers and things like that. So these platforms, I think, have really shifted the retail landscape and shrunk down the time that's needed to get set up, and made it possible for drinks brands to get to a pretty decent size on their own before necessarily needing a lot of investment or additional support. And I'll caveat this by saying that this is also dependent on what you're selling. And again, so getting into the whiskey business is not for the faint of heart. But if you are passionate about creating gin or creating rum or a non-alcoholic spirit, getting going it's not going to be dependent on letting whiskey age in a barrel for 3 to 10 to 20 years. So the startup costs are a little bit more accessible. So as a founder, someone with limited time and limited resources, you have your Amazon, you have Shopify, you have these, direct to consumer platforms that allow you to create traction in a much earlier than you would be able to before. You don't necessarily, as a founder, you don't have to spend your time convincing supermarket buyers to shelve your bottle. You don't have to spend your weekends at the local farmers market giving out samples or driving around to all of the local pubs and bars trying to get a menu listing. So it's just been this amazing transformation that's been made possible by technology, I think. And couple this with kind of the democratizing effects of social media. So you think about newer platforms, we've heard a lot probably about TikTok and a lot about Clubhouse, platforms that make it really, really easy to connect directly with people, as well as these more established channels like Instagram, like Facebook, podcasts, founders and brands, it's so much easier now to connect directly to consumers, to build these like much more personal and close relationships, and also obviously to sell bottles and to glean some really, really valuable insight on how your proposition is landing, how your message is landing, all of this kind of insight and information that maybe wasn't available prior to. So I think it's something that the last year has no doubt, supercharged, with so many of us just glued to our screens for so many hours of the day. And we've all probably been spending a lot more time researching and trialing new products and actively seeking, newness and stimulation, and basically, anything to kind of distract ourselves from the monotony and from the sadness that we've all been surrounded by, right? And I think all things considered, along with the increase in captive consumer eyeballs, I think another upside has been, the creative headspace that lockdown has created for some people. In some cases, it's given people an opportunity to go from thinking about setting up a brand or about, a big idea that's kind of been in the back of their head for years to actually doing it. And I think an example of this is, I think in 2020, there have been 50 non-alcoholic spirit brands that have launched globally. So, I mean, that's obviously a testament to the category and to the demand for, product, interesting grown-up non-alcoholic drinks, but also that there's just massive amounts of founder energy out there that have been kind of waiting to be unleashed. I guess one of the things, unfortunately, that hasn't been made easier with technology, though, is scaling a founder-led brand, which, funnily enough, happens to be Distill Ventures' specialty, or one of them. If you're ambitious and you want to keep growing, once you get to that certain size, you're inevitably going to have to start playing ball with the big, distributors, retailers, pub and bar chains, all of those folks. But back to, I think, what makes founder-led brands interesting and why we're so passionate about them. And I think the clue is in the name. It's the founders, isn't it? It's that unfakeable authenticity, that passion. As a consumer, I think you know it when you see it. When you see a brand like Costa or something doing craft coffee, you as a consumer, you instantly question that word craft. People have become so savvy now, and you can clearly see when a brand is authentically founder-led. When I think about the difference between some traditional whiskey brands out there that have been around for 100+ years, and some of the ones that we work with, like Stowning and like Starward, who are making amazing whiskey down in Australia, or Westward, who are based out in the Pacific Northwest. So much of what draws me to them is the people. You can meet the founder because they're a living, breathing human instead of someone who lived 100 years ago in a totally different country. That the message and the story is rooted in modern culture, in those local ingredients, in local communities, and it's relatable, it's compelling, it's authentic, and it's interesting. It's something that we as DV, we keep coming back to, and I think probably all of you out there do as well. So I hope that gives you some insight into why we've built our business around founder-led brands and why we think they have an almost unfair advantage when it comes to competing against the bigger boys out there. Just quick, push for DV. If you are a founder-led brand, if you're looking for ways to help your brand go further or faster, definitely get in touch with us. There's a lot of information on the DV website about the deal and how everything works. But with that, I'll hand back over to David. Thank you.
Thank you, Allie. That was really great. I think loud and clear, I'm hearing authenticity and people and really engaging with founders and that story and that authenticity, some of the stuff Kelly spoke about. And we do have a couple of questions, Allie, that came through during the week. First question, you touched on some of this as you spoke, but the question is, what are the most interesting drink trends you're seeing at the moment and why? And you obviously touched on the rise of D2C and how that's been massively sped up with the pandemic. You also talked about the rise of zero alcohol beers, and I think low and no is probably another trend we've all seen. But I'd be keen to hear what you think the most interesting drink trends are at the moment and why.
I mean, I think you've hit on two of them. I think non-alcoholic drinks and spirits in particular is really, really fascinating. We've done a lot of work and do a lot of research on the category, and it's one of these categories that hasn't really been touched by COVID. It's just been fascinating, kind of watching the rise and watching all of these new brands come out. And watching how it's really starting to differentiate itself. I think a lot of it started with white spirit replacements. And I think in the last kind of like 6 to 12 months, we've seen a lot more people coming out with more like aperitif brands, more like dark spirits, kind of like rum replacements and whiskey replacements. So it's kind of, I think it has the potential to kind of be, probably on a smaller scale, but be a mirror to like traditional spirits. And then also I think New World whiskey, as we talk about it, is absolutely fascinating. So this is kind of whiskey either being made in in non-traditional countries, or people taking really kind of classic techniques, and turning them on its head, or making things like our one of our brands, Westward, for example. They're based out in Portland, and they make American single malt, which is where you're normally going to associate single malt with Scotland, but they've taken this amazing beer culture out in Portland, and they make this they've turned it into this incredible liquid that they're aging and selling, and they made a sourdough whiskey over the last year, which I think is probably like the epitome of a lockdown spirit, if I ever heard one.
Yeah.
And I think all of this, I think underpinned by the incredible growth of e-commerce and D2C is just doing amazing things for drinks at the moment.
Great, thanks, Allie. Last question is about, and you've obviously touched on some advice, but obviously with the huge rise in creativity and people launching businesses, food and drink businesses during lockdown. What would you say is your one key piece of advice to founder-led challenger brands trying to get off the ground and taking her this big?
I think like what it always comes back to for us is the people. So I don't think there's necessarily like one piece of advice, but I think kind of like if you're as a founder, if you're doing something it's not kind of just to make a buck. It's something that, you have kind of like the confidence and the belief and the ambition in what you're doing, and kind of, I guess, holding on to that. And, you can kind of see the role that your product or your drink, your brand is going to play in the future, and just being quite single-minded about that. I think, I'm sure Alex can talk to this as well. As a founder, you get pulled in a lot of different directions, but being able to kind of keep focus is really important.